And so it is, the C word, consciousness. Uranus in Gemini is not about more code. Note, hi peeps, I got inspired so this article is a bit long, yet juicy. Here's a preview. First part is Ontology, Qualia, Semantics, Thoughts, and Forms. These are threads that I've been tracing where language, structure, and the rawness of experience intersect. Number two, disrupting mental flow. The mind is wired for patterns, but Uranus is here to tear through them. Number three, the nature of my reality. Reality has always been layered. This is how I've learned to read its architecture. Number four, the mirroring of concepts. Structure meaning keep reflecting each other syntax, semantics, presence, and they loop. Number five, all that is. Beneath words, beneath measurement, there is the pulse of being. Number six, the origins. Every structure, every system, every idea, before all that, there is the source. Number seven, machines and meaning. The machines can run the code, but they can't touch what lives beneath it. And last but not least, and what about the markets? The same patterns play out in price and speculation in the nervous system of trade. It's all part of the architecture cracking open. Enjoy. Hey peeps, one last thing. I'm recording the full audio, 40 minutes, and it's going to be always in the same place. But for those who want to be able to listen to it in different parts, just scroll down a little bit after the notes, and you're going to have a few different audios to reach the article so you don't have to listen to the whole thing. Have fun. Ta-da! Ontology, Qualia, Semantics, Thoughts, and Forms. So here I am, finishing some images for a commission that is about to wrap in San Antonio, Texas. Before I send them to the fabricator and get approval from the committee. And posting some documentation below of my latest public art commission, Arcana, for the IEB at the University of Washington in Seattle. I'm always very curious to see what other thing I'm going to get into. What am I going to be reading? What's going to flow next? Where my frequency is tuning into? Well, let's say I became aware of the work of Federico Fagin a couple of years ago. But it was only in the last months that I became really curious. His book, Irreducible, came out, and I finally had the time to listen to it in Italian. He's an Italian physicist who has been living in the United States for decades now. I speak Italian fluently, and I also got a copy in English, just in case. But the Italian version stayed with me. There's a depth in the language that never leaves you. We owe that to Dante. He gave us the Italian language we know now. He decentralized language when he wrote the Divine Comedy. He made it vulgar. He wrote it for the people. Vulgar comes from the Latin vulgaris. It means common, of the people, spoken by everyone. The way Virgin writes and the way he speaks is so profoundly complex, simple in expression, beautiful in its own rhythm. Ta-da! Disrupting mental flow. Uranus in Gemini will disrupt and crack open the structures of thought, language, symbols, the very scaffolding of mental patterns. Gemini is the archetype of duality, of words, of coding, the left side of the brain, the nervous system of ideas. Uranus severs outdated patterns, liberates the mental field, forces a leap beyond habitual thought forms. Uranus in Gemini is going to be destabilizing the calcified framework of the mind because Fagin reminds us that semantics and qualia, the felt, the living layer, cannot be programmed, and that true liberation of thought is not more code, it is returning to consciousness as the source. Uranus as a high octave of Mercury works as the breaking point where thought itself gives away. Mercury governs language and logic, the structure of ideas. Jupiter expands that into meaning, into philosophy, into intuitive understanding. But Uranus arrives beyond both, disrupting and barely expanding it. It cuts through the architecture, shattering outdated narratives, jolting us beyond the framework of language and into a direct presence. This transit exposes what exists beyond them, the raw, irreducible field of awareness we keep pointing toward. Quote, consciousness cannot be reduced to the manipulation of symbols. It is the irreducible foundation from which meaning arises. Federico Fagin, Irreducible. End of quote. Federico's work is the perfect companion to this transit because he reminds us that the mind, the code, the language is just a downstream of consciousness. Consciousness is the base. We cannot reduce it to anything else. As Uranus disrupts, it will be inviting us to return to the well, to the raw, essential field of experience from which language emerges. Consciousness is the essential ground from which mathematics stems. Mathematics is a product of conscious beings exploring the patterns and relationships of the world. It does not precede or generate consciousness. It is a flowing stream of awareness downloaded. I am paraphrasing what he said in an interview in 2023. In other words, mathematics as code is language. It is a reflection, a shadow downstream from the source. Ta-da! The nature of my reality. Plato taught that behind the visible world lies an invisible architecture, the forms, the essence that shape what we perceive. His solids were a glimpse into the structure, where geometry became a bridge between matter and meaning. The pyramid, the octahedron, the icosahedron, the dodecahedron, the cube, they help us understand nature through geometry, which is the space of numbers. Each of these shapes carries a numerical relationship. The edges, the angles, the faces, they reveal patterns hidden in plain sight. Even the simplest, the tetrahedron, falls into the rhythm. Its structure multiplies into the number 1440. One could say it's coincidence, but that's the number of minutes we have in a day. 24 hours times 60 minutes, all multiples of 12. The universe arranges itself this way. The numbers reveal the structure. Quote, all things are the offspring of necessity and reason. Plato, Timaeus. Plato taught all this. One needed to understand the principles of numbers, geometry, harmonics, and astronomy to enter a space, to philosophize, to define our own truth. In my first book, The Nature of My Reality, I was very interested in the study of being. What is it? What exists? How can we define this experience? I introduced the code and language I have used to decipher what I perceive as real. And now, based on that foundation, I keep building from it. As I mentioned earlier in writings, I'm on my second book, which is more specific about how this experience has given me the meaning of diving into what value really means. But again, this article is not about these books. It is about the experience of this reality and how consciousness, mathematics, and language, whether in code or grammar, are fundamentally distinct yet intertwined realities, the measurable and the unmeasurable. It is like placing Plato's work in relationship to Aristotle's. What can be seen, what can be touched, and what is originated from that, the ontology versus the empiricism. Plato showed us the invisible patterns, the unseen architecture that generates the seen. Aristotle grounded us in the material world, what can be touched, measured, cataloged, named. One points to essence and the other one to substance. They are not at odds, they're different layers of how we meet reality. Ta-ding! The mirroring of concepts. So syntax is grammar. And in physics, these are the equations, the probabilities, and the measurable structure. And the semantics is the meaning, the felt, lived interior layer, otherwise known as the synthesis. It is the thing, the structure pointing toward but never containing, in code, in language. It is what the words actually mean beyond the grammatical order. In reality, it is presence, yeah? So, when you're using grammar, you create a structure. That is the syntax. You arrange the symbols as they compose a phrase. But then, what the phrase is talking about, that is the semantics. So, Fagin says quantum mechanics is about information, hence, structure. And for him, syntax is evidence that semantics must exist somewhere. So he's saying, wherever there is a syntax or a grammar or a construction, there must be some meaning at some point. Oh, wow, this is great. Let's back up. the equations, the probabilities, the measurable information. That is like the grammar of reality. But grammar exists to carry meaning, a structure that implies something beyond itself. We can make a comparison between this axiom and poetry, for example. In poetry, you have certain rules, and then you write the quatrains or however you want to compose it. That is the structure of the poem. But at the very end, how you decipher it, how you read it, that is the semantic of it. In his view, the presence of syntax in the fabric of reality is proof that there is a deeper layer. Thus, in any kind of structure that exists, there is always some sort of meaning. It is not just data, there is also meaning, as they are connected, giving purpose to it. And that layer is what consciousness is. But Jin criticizes the materialists because they miss the sentience, the signified reality. In his view, semantic reality and consciousness point to the same thing, the living layer beneath structure, the meaning of life. That is presence, isn't it? And when he says layer of meaning is the real ontology, he's saying that the true nature of being, the study of what is the true study of all that is. It is not the structure of particles, it is the meaning of life itself. What he's saying is that the universe appears as a structure, but it only coheres when there's purpose, when something deeper moves through it, and that the deeper thread stems from consciousness. So, of course, value fits within this. Value is just a structure, a system, a relationship I place on a need, a framework that holds together the visible layer. But beyond that support, there's the felt weight, the significance, the resonance. And that's where worth emerges. Worth is consciousness made visible. That's where Jupiter belongs, expanding thought into relevance, into significance rooted in what matters. With that thread present, Gemini holds its rhythm, language, thought, value. Everything moves with coherence again. Value, like all structures, arises as syntax, the framework of code, the architecture we apply to needs, to systems, to exchange. But significance, the real weight of something, lives beyond that grid. It is semantic. It belongs to the irreducible layer of experience, to consciousness, to presence, just like language or mathematics or reality itself. Syntax is mercurial, Gemini, the left brain, the code, the pattern, seeking framework of language and thought. Semantics is Jovian, Sagittarius, the right side of the brain, the search for significance, the expansion that unfolds when structure meets depth. And that depth, the full resonance, only reveals itself when both integrate, when the nervous systems of logic and the vast field of knowing converge. That convergence is consciousness. Trin, all that is. Quote, it is through wonder that men now begin and first began to philosophize. Aristotle, Metaphysics, Book 1, Part 2. End of quote. For example, mathematics, which is one of the four quadrivium, belongs to the world of symbols. It is a representational plane. It is powerful as it reveals relationships and structures, but it operates in abstraction. Consciousness is the ground of being. It is the first person, the experiential reality. It is the perception of how you see your reality. It cannot be encoded, reduced, or generated by mathematics. It precedes and contains everything, all that is. When you start questioning the nature of your reality, one has to understand that definitions are very limited because words are an expression of something that is felt. And if we don't understand what feeling and sensing are, the five senses, we're just reduced to words, to signifiers. We need the five senses in order to perceive this reality. Now, this is different from the emotional body that I speak so much about in my previous articles. When you sense something, it gives you the capacity to be measuring, to be receiving information, and then processing that information in your brain. Your logical stream starts recognizing patterns, and with language, you can actually start speaking them, defining them, ordering them, even editing them with the logical part of the brain. I have also spoken about intuition. That comes from the experience, the intangible sense that is lived, the one you can actually recall in memory. How does it feel? Let's say you're a little child and you put your hand unknowingly on top of the stove and you get burnt. You will remember how it feels. And the next time, your brain will make a connection that maybe that's not a good idea. Even before that, your parents told you that was not a good idea. But that was a rational, logical explanation. It couldn't be felt until it happens, until it becomes an experience. You do not have a connection with that in memory. Now, Gemini, as the archetype, the code, the nervous system of ideas, is directly connected to the logical pattern seeking part of the mind. Gemini rules how we process information, how we name, order, analyze, and define the patterns we perceive. It is the sign of language, duality, contrast. It nominates and categorizes. The left brain, the compartmentalizing, labeling, classifying side. And here's the opening because Uranus is about to enter Gemini. As Uranus enters without permission, not a gentle at all, it will be fracturing, severing, liberating, destabilizing, conditioned, crystallized patterns by forcing the mind to leap beyond structure. What happens when Uranus strikes the logical foundations of Gemini? Well, the names, the labels, the language, the categories, all the structures we use to organize reality will break, sometimes shockingly, cracking open a new way of relating to them. And this is precisely where we're at with this article. Between Fagin reminding us that consciousness is the source, between Plato and Aristotle's truths, between my first book of reality and my second one, Exploring Value, between the quadrivium, the measurable and the immeasurable. Let's embrace Uranus as the Lord that jolts the language of the mind. Last year, during 2024, we had Jupiter expanding our mind in Gemini. Remember, Jupiter and Uranus met at the very end of Taurus on April 20th, 2024, starting a new cycle where meaning acquired an innovative sense of grounding value, giving us an understanding of where value really lies as a subjective relationship, if we're able to tap into that energy. Then Jupiter entered Gemini, and for 12 months, give or take, it gave us the opportunity to tap into the mercurial nervousness and see how, in a very schizophrenic way, it wanted to expand in many directions. Uranus, right now, very different energy. It forces the mind to leap beyond the structures we're grown to attach to. Quote, as David Bohm wrote, the ability to perceive or think differently is more important than knowledge gain. End of quote. Remember that intuition? It's a synthesis. This is what's going to bring abstract thinking, pattern recognition beyond language. And Jupiter, it's its own territory. It is expanding and it's seeking to understand in a very different way. It wants to complement it. It wants not just to be organized, but to be able to be functional. I see the function of Jupiter very different than the function of Gemini. We need both, to say the least. Jupiter is going to give us meaning. And as I said before, meaning stems from value, and value stems from needs. And if we know what we need, we know what we value. And if we know what the value of life is, very meaningful, isn't it? Killing the origins. There's always an origin, the beginning of an idea, an initiation. But before the origin, there's all that is. I've been speaking about Gemini, Mercury, and the mind, about Jupiter, Sagittarius, and intuition, but we have to talk about the origin, the source of things. That's Neptune, Pisces energy. Neptune had been in Pisces for 40 years before it moved to Aries on the 1st of April this year. Saturn was in Pisces since March 2023, and it also moved into Aries a little bit after Neptune. The origin of things always brings us back to the source. And what we call source, each one of us calls it differently. Some people call it God, all that is. Some people are more agnostic. We all have a different way of relating to where we think we come from. And again, thinking in quotation mark. The origin of things, the source, is always a place very beautiful. We had Neptune in Pisces, dissolving boundaries, steering the longing to return to source. But Neptune is not the base itself. It points to the source. It is the wave upon the ocean of being. It inspires, but it does not generate presence. Living awareness is the raw, irreducible, first person field we speak of. It is the origin beyond language. In the book I'm reading by Federico Fagin, he speaks about the moment where he had this awakening. It was back in the 80s. He was at the Lake Tahoe one evening. He must have been around 50 years old. He went for a glass of water in the middle of the night and he was looking out through the window into the lake. And then he felt this immense thing in his heart. I don't know how to describe it. We have to go back to the book to see his words exactly, but he felt this sensation very strong, and then he felt love, that everything was made out of love. And he says that the first time he saw himself outside of himself, he was observing himself. This is how quantum mechanics defines it: the ability to observe what is happening from a third person perspective. It's a practice that the Buddha helped us realize that when we know that we're not our thinking, we can actually see our connection to something bigger. Thinking, thinking. It's important if we have something to solve, but thinking, that's the source of all problems in modern society. That's my saying. So the origin is, can you tap into the origin of all that is through your own experience? Because I can describe to you, like Federico just described to me, the origin of his awakening, as all of us are going to have a different moment where we connect the threads. I was about 8 when my father died. Saturn was in Gemini. He was making a square to my Pluto in Virgo. Uranus was opposite my natal Mars at 22 degrees of Libra. Transiting Pluto was squaring my nodal axis. The way I would have to integrate my authority was through self validation. Profound. Neptune and Mars were in my 10th house in Sagittarius. Both were perfectly squaring my Saturn in Pisces and Uranus in Virgo position. It speaks to a tension that was already initiating the dissolution of what real parental authority was. Saturn is authority, and that death transformed and severed the possibility of growing up with a father's holding hand. A few years later, while Uranus was still transiting my ninth house, I dove into philosophy to try to understand what had broken inside me. His books on Jung and Nietzsche, questioning reality, were my entry point to keep alive his memory. It didn't make sense, so I kept going. When I was in my early 20s, maybe in the summer of 87, I was living between Greece and London. Transiting Pluto was about to leave my ninth house. A transformed view of the world had taken place. I was ready to transform my identity and career as soon as Pluto completed its journey into my 10th house in 2001. One night in Athens, at a kiosk in the main square, Syntagma, a book called Out of a Limb by an actress called Shirley MacLaine just looked at me as if saying, "Buy me, buy me." That night before, under the stars, I had been talking to my boyfriend Omiros about the origin of things. I wouldn't usually pick that book, but I read it in 2 takes. It told of an alien encounters in Peru, of how tapping into unconscious revealed reality beyond reason. That was the door into metaphysics for me. There was no internet. I started searching for all the books I could get my hands on. I was living in London at the time. The metaphysics section in the library was so thin you could miss it. Then I read Seth Speaks. Whoa. All of Jane Roberts' transmissions revealed things I already knew in my bones. Mostly books about all religions, philosophy, the nature of reality in every possible way. A lot of woo woo. Living in Greece a few years later proved helpful. The Greeks naturally revolve around these existential questions. By the time the Uranus Neptune conjunction happened in Capricorn, both planets had touched my south node in early Capricorn in the 11th house and were transiting my 12th house. That marked the beginning of a quiet, relentless series of upgrades to my operating system. It didn't happen overnight. It dissolved, rewired, rewrote from the inside out. I remember telling my friends that everything had consciousness. I started using that word and watching their faces. One night at a pub, my best friend just looked at me and laughed as he said, "You know, you're saying that even ashtrays have consciousness, right? And now you're smoking and you're killing the ashtray." And he couldn't stop laughing with his sister because they were saying I was aware that I was killing the things. We still laugh about that. 39 years later, here I am, curious how Uranus in Gemini will crack open humanity's relationship to consciousness, and amused, really, that we will still speak of questioning consciousness at all, as if a fish could question the ocean or language could explain its own silence. It is absurd, but it is what we do. Ta-ding! Machines and meaning. Fajin was, after all, the inventor of the microprocessor. We talk about AI today like it's something entirely new, but it's been seeded for decades. Even back in the 80s, he was already thinking about artificial intelligence and about other kinds of intelligence. The intelligence that can't be built by machines, the intelligence that lives in experience, the intelligence that lives in consciousness. By the way, a microprocessor is a tiny architecture that makes modern computers possible. The core, the little silicon brain that processes instructions, that runs code. Without it, there's no device, no app, no AI. Fajin helped build that, but he never mistook processing power for consciousness. Consciousness, if we want to reduce it to a word, is awareness, the ability to witness, to give light to who we are so we can create our universe, not the other way around. If we are unaware, we let the universe, or worse, the collective, define where we're going. Until we take that responsibility inside of ourselves, whatever we build is just a mimic of something else, not a true intentional expression of all that is. And we have to really sit with that. Why did we come to live during these times? Why, as souls in a state of evolution, are we here now? And if you want to understand that deeper, look at your chart. Your chart will show you the process of Pluto. It tells you what kind of generation you belong to and where you are disempowered. Your nodal axis and the rulers of the nodes and their relationships, that's going to tell you where you're coming from, where you're going, and what is the possession of the gifts you bring to unfold. Then you can go deeper into understanding what are you here liberating yourself from. That's Uranus. And how your mind and your intuition are going to help you thread it all together. But you need a good reader, because if you go to AI and you just look for definitions, you're going to miss what's important, the lived and felt experience. AI gives you syntax by processing language, but it cannot give you meaning nor synthesis. AI impairs your cognitive capacity to understand that being human is a superpower. Synthesis is when all the fragments come together, when logic, intuition, experience, memory, feeling, they converge. Suddenly, it's understanding, meaning, way more than data per se. Semantics is the living layer of meaning, the felt interior knowing that no machine can replicate. Semantics comes from the Greek semantikos, meaning significant, from semeno, to signify, to indicate. That's the invitation for you guys right now. When Uranus is going to be cracking open the way of thought, the invitation is to meet it, to remember that in the gaps, in the fractures, in the cracks, in the silence after language breaks, there's a space for something real to return to. And that is called a state of consciousness. Quote, as Jeffrey Wolf Green describes, Uranus also correlates to all the memories of this and other lives. It correlates to all the memories and knowledge that have ever come before, that which you cannot necessarily recall consciously. Uranus in the third house, or Gemini. Mental trauma can occur when these people or these times experience life in situations that directly confront the way in which they understand life via their ideas, opinions, and mental constructions. The intensity of that confrontations or experiences forces them to question and restructure their mental constructions so that the new ideational system occurs. End of quote. The last time Uranus transited Gemini, the world witnessed disruption in thought and technology. It aligned with wartime scientific breakthroughs, the Manhattan Project led by Oppenheimer, the Shelter Island Conference reshaping quantum theory, the invention of the radar, jet engines, and early computers. It was a moment when the mechanics of communication shattered all paradigms and ushered a quantum consciousness. One of the things that I sense happening right now is a bit different, as science is about tuning into a different frequency of understanding, not so much about inventing new things. It is how reality is perceived from the state of consciousness that you are finding yourself, and how you can tweak your reality not through controlling your thoughts, but through the way you relate to them. This is how you reach another kind of memory, another kind of state. When you tap into your long term memory or Uranus realm, this is another state of consciousness, another mindset, one that is anchored in the metaphysical and connects to all that is. Ta-ding. And what about the market? What about trading, communication, speculation? Uranus as the archetype of invention, systemic acceleration, and the force that severes stagnation and installs new structures, especially in technology, networks, and information. As it enters Gemini, the archetype of exchange, language, code, trade, markets, speculation, dualities, it electrifies the very channels through which communication and values circulate. Gemini rules how goods, currency, and information move. It is the nervous system of commerce itself. The brokers, the traders, the speculators, the code behind the trades. As I mentioned earlier, Uranus in Gemini will break and rewire the system. Therefore, expect disruptions in digital networks, new protocols for financial exchange, volatility driven by information chaos. The rise of decentralized technologies reshaping how we trade, speak, and transact. We already see that stablecoins are here to stay, and people are lending money right and left to be able to stack more Bitcoin in their reserves. There is this nervousness happening for accumulation. So Bitcoin sits right in the center of this, as it is pure code and its language defines how value can be saved in hard money. It already is inside of this frequency shift, so it already carries this energy. We track Uranus because it moves on time. Every 84 years, it comes around, breaks the system apart, resets the structure. The fourth turning follows that same rhythm, a generational cycle you see playing out across history. Politics, markets, currency, value, human behavior. They all ride the same wheel. That's how the structure resets. It's mechanical geometry. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Why don't we talk about the structural harmonics that we can map in the markets, like W.D. Gann did through price? Gurdjieff spoke of it through movement, sound, and octave. Many mystics trace the same geometry of 45 degrees. It's a breaking point, an interval where direction shifts. You see it in music, planetary cycles, market charts, the same wheel repeating itself. So I divide the circle in numbers that carry that harmonic. They shape the rhythm of change. I've been watching it through those same angles. I've been dividing the 45 degrees even further down to 22.5 degrees, 11.25, and so on. And because Bitcoin has only been trading for 16 years, we can't yet stretch Uranus across its full fractal, but the rhythm is already visible. The pattern is in motion. The geometry holds. Let's track it backward from July 7th, 2025, when Uranus enters 0 degrees Gemini together with Venus. The angular completion of this fractal. I'm measuring every 11.25 degrees, which is 1/8 of a full 90 degrees quarter turn. 18 degrees of 25 minutes of Taurus, August 2022. This was unique. Uranus met with Mars in the North Node exactly. The market turned volatile. Bitcoin hovered nearly 24,000 and accumulation patterns shifted. By November 2022, we all remember the FTX collapse. Bitcoin reached as low as $15,000. Go backwards to 7 degrees of Taurus in April 27, 2020, on my birthday. Bitcoin reversed from the COVID crash, launching its bullish cycle. Go backwards 26.25 degrees in Aries, March 2017. Bitcoin broke above $1,200, marking the start of its mainstream acceleration. Backwards again 11.25 degrees, 15 degrees of Aries, January 2015. Bitcoin bottomed near $170 after its first major speculative collapse. The pattern follows a clear rhythm. The angles divide the cycle with precision, mapping ruptures, reversals, and initiations in both markets and collective behavior. This fractal continues to unfold, revealing itself step by step. You can trace market ruptures and initiations right alongside Uranus rhythm. And guess what? We can already see how the channels of trade and communication are shifting in real time. As I'm writing this, the big, beautiful bill just passed, giving Trump another win and shaking up the tax code again. How that's going to ripple into markets, money flow, and value remains to be seen, but it's part of the same architecture cracking open. The Genius Act in the US creates a federal stablecoin framework with full reserves and monthly audits, turning digital money into tightly controlled, high speed financial code. The digital euro pilots in Europe are testing programmable currency expected to roll out by late 2025, recoding trade channels as centralized digital tools. MICA and the Digital Service Act in Europe brings stricter crypto rules and proactive content censorship even at the protocol level, pushing speech and trade through controlled coded gates. The US Crypto and AI Executive Order reshuffles agencies in favor of faster speculative flows and evolving digital markets. The UK Online Safety Act and China's crypto controls expand surveillance, turning the same technologies that connect us into tools for control. Bottom line, Uranus in Gemini is already shredding the old channels, speech, code, money, and remixing the architecture of communicating, speculating, and value. Technology speeds things up, no doubt, but it is also programs the flow, censors speech, and rewires how value moves in real time. My friend Efrat Fenningson has been speaking a lot about these shifts in CBDCs and stablecoins. If you want to go deeper, she's the one to follow. Can we see another all time high for Bitcoin between July 7th and the 9th or thereafter? Who knows? I have already marked my calendar and I have my numbers. I won't disclose them because I'm not speculating here. I say that Bitcoin is a state of consciousness. The awareness exists before the code, before the numbers, before the measurable structure appears. Through code, it takes form, becoming a symbol. We have to act upon it. Once aware of it and tuned to its frequency, humans give it meaning through action, through choice, through responsibility. For me, that is where value lives, and that is how consciousness moves into form. Remember, I am building meaning in that way I live, in the way I feel, in the way I perceive, in the way I synthesize what's already been seated inside. At some point, I could arrive at a place where I've read enough books and the library is inside me. I just pick up the shelf when I need it. The rest comes from my own experience, from how I meet reality. Remember, Jupiter is in Cancer and it's all about feelings and your environment. So if you feel like crying, play a good song. Go and feel the sand or the grass below your feet. And if you are in a cold country, or it's raining, or it's snowing, or you are in the tropics and you live in different temperatures, just make sure that you connect to the reality of Mother Earth. Have a great week and happy 4th of July for you patriots.